You're not gonna use. I'm just gonna put the screen up. You don't need to screen.
But it was close to, there was no issue. That's true, actually. That is pretty surprising. It seemed like way too rare. It seemed outside of a state's purview to be able to 100% really user really high. It also depends on the country. I think China would that would be great. Yeah, but isn't there an argument that people always find ways beyond that? I don't think so. Australia banned social media for minor command. But then it's so funny because all the arguments that it's bad for kids immediately generalize. You can read the ancient generation, but all those arguments generalize immediately with adults. Yeah. Supposedly yeah, so then that is not the same issue. But
I mean, Trump's in charge. There's no cancellation anymore. Yeah. What is happening? Why? No, I don't need to log in.
See, I think it depends who's going. It depends who's going. If everyone who's going is going back to the island, for example, or the island, or centrally. We'll see. There's a handout. But you see what I'm saying? If there's no upside, actually you don't need one.
yeah.
For sure.
Monopoly privacy rights and like language. Privacy rights killing the something like the mind like you might believe the privacy rights are legitimate for updating our understanding of that, but
on one specific question that I think is very important to answer if you want to figure out whether AIs have welfare. I'm not going to talk much about AIs during this talk because it's just that figuring out the answer to this question is important to whether AIs have welfare, but it doesn't matter during the actual dialectic figuring out the answer to the question. It's just the answer matters, but AIs are not going to help us find it. Okay, so this talk I'm going to be focusing on a particular theory of welfare, which is desire satisfactionism, that says what makes your life go better or worse. It's satisfying your desires. And then the question ultimately I'm interested in is, okay, if you have that kind of theory, then what would it take for AIs to have welfare? In my opinion, if you have that theory, desire satisfactionism, then AIs have welfare if they have desires, because then if they have desires are satisfied, and then when they're satisfied, they get welfare. So then you would want to just go through, well, what's the right theory of desire? And then you go through the theories of desire, see whether AIs satisfy the theory of desire. That's how you'd like it to go, but then it turns out there's a problem. And the problem, I'm going to call the problem of genuine desire, which is that when we look at humans, there seem to be all sorts of cases where someone maybe in some sense does desire something, but it doesn't improve their welfare to get it. And then some desire satisfaction is response that there's a special class of desires that are relevant to welfare. But then the issue will be, well, maybe AIs would have desires in the general sense, but they wouldn't have the special kinds of desires that are welfare. So that's where we are. Okay, so the handout, by the way, just has a series of truths, but I'm not going to just be going in the order of the handout. I'm just going to be talking, and then there are truths on the handout. Okay, so all right. So the way I'm going to kind of proceed is I'm going to start by going through kind of a pretty dominant theory of desire that's very popular, and then just talk a little about what it really says, and then show you a bunch of problem cases where desires, at least according to that theory, there are humans who have desires where it seems very clear that those desires do not contribute to wealth. Okay, so the kind of standard theory I'm going to be grappling with as a starting point is sometimes called the motivational theory of desire, that basically connects desires to dispositions to act. So the simplest version of that theory, which is wrong, is to desire that P is to be disposed to bring it about that P. And then one thing I want to flag is that one of the largest disputes about this kind of theory is actually orthogonal deviations. It's unrelated deviations. So one of the big disputes is whether mere dispositions to act are sufficient, or whether you also need internal representation. So according to representationalists, it's not enough that a system is just disposed to do something. It has to, that disposition has to itself be explained in terms of mental representations, which would be internal mental structures that fire differentially in response to different stimulus. So maybe you need like a model of the world, and you need some goals represented. And then the reason you're disposed to act is that, you know, the goal is represented, and then you're a system that kind of searches for actions that, you know, are related to the representation. So that debate, though, it turns out is first of all, it's not going to be relevant to any of the issues today. And second of all, that's not like a, in my opinion, a big, that's not going to be like an insuperable barrier for AIs to have welfare, because actually the more we learn about current AIs, the more it seems they do have internal representation, structured internal representations. But anyways, okay. So the first thing I just want to walk you through is, which is relevant to later, is why the simplest version of dispositionalism I just said is actually not quite right, and we just want to slightly tweak, and then that tweak will come back at the end of the talk. So the first case to just think about is this case of pure habit. So that's under cases on the handout. So think of a person who, oh, I forgot, like, I don't know, it's on page 117 of a book, but I forgot whose book it is. So sorry, it's somebody. I think it's got to be Tim Schroeder, something Tim Schroeder. Huh? Do you think it's that one? Okay. Think of a person who, because of the rewards and penalties attached, has formed a habit of turning left at a certain intersection towards the place of work. The person turns left out of habit for years, but then gets a new place of work. The old workplace is torn down. Now there's nothing but industrial desolation at that street. Even knowing all this, the person may still find himself with a tendency to turn left at the familiar intersection, a meaningless behavioral tendency. The tendency will not be exercised when the person is paying attention, but when distracted in the moment, the old operating conditioning may take over and produce a left turn in response to a familiar stimulus. So the point is, some of our actions are caused by habit, and it seems like it's caused by habit rather than desire. So why is that? Well, here you can appeal to regular dispositionalism or representationalism that says desire to be so disposed that if one were to believe that taking action would be an effective method for bringing it about the P, then one would take it. And so the idea is, well, the relevant kind of action disposition that is constitutive of desire is going to be belief mediated. So that, and it's going to be kind of this kind of disposition that it's like across a wide range of cases, across a wide range of means. When you believe that's a means, then you're disposed to the point. The problem with the habit case of this theory is, well, it's a very fragile disposition that's not belief mediated. So yeah, when he gets to this one intersection, turns left, and he's exposed to this particular stimulus, but he's not systematically disposed to go to a location. Because, you know, for example, if he's in a different stimulus environment, if he's in a different part of the city, he wouldn't start rooting over to go to that old location. So the action is only being triggered in a particular stimulus. And that suggests that there's not the relevant kind of belief mediated dispositions. Okay, so that's, and by the way, it seems really implausible that just doing what you have a habit of doing would contribute to your welfare. So definitely, even if you did say there was a desire in this case, then you're going to want to say only only genuine desire contribute to welfare, and this isn't a genuine desire. So that's just the first case to see as well. Okay, there are cases where an agent is disposed to do something, but that clearly does not contribute. Okay, so that motivates. That's a kind of an initial case, and there's going to be many more that motivate this search for what I'm going to use as a placeholder, the term genuine desire. That you genuinely desire that P, if and only if you desire that P, and satisfying the desire promotes welfare. I mean, it's not a perfect definition because it kind of presupposes the truth of desire satisfactionism, but we're just going to, in this house, we believe desire satisfactionism is for today, we're going to believe it's true. Okay? And so we're just going to operate all the definitions make sense if you are certain of that. All right. So now we're going to go through the main march of the talk. So the main march of the talk is going through a bunch of problem cases for where it seems like an agent satisfies dispositionalism, but so they would have a desire maybe, but that desire doesn't contribute to welfare. And in every case, there's two ways of going. You can say, well, this issue is a better theory of desire. And really, yeah, desire is what contributes to welfare. Or you can say, okay, they do have a desire, but only special, genuine desire the welfare and they don't have a genuine desire. I don't care about that for this purpose, because what I ultimately care about is whether AIs have welfare. So we can kind of divide out the question of whether they desire by just introducing the term genuine desire. Okay, so first class of cases have been explained by Chris Heathwood as involving pleasure. So on the kind of theory that he sort of torturedly gestures towards, that would be the pleasure theory, which says you genuinely desire the P if and only if you desire the P and you're disposed to feel pleasure, and it seems to you that okay, he doesn't literally assert that because he doesn't really assert me. But we're gonna pretend that Chris Heathwood would. Okay. So why accept that kind of thing? Well, there's a series of problem cases that seem nicely explained by that. So the first case is from Warren Quinn called Radio Man, and then the case here is the case as stipulated. Nothing more is said. Radio Man, quote, is in a strange functional state that disposes him to turn on radios that he sees to be turned on. Wait. It disposes him to turn. I don't know what happened. I think that's not. It disposes him to turn on radios. It's when he sees it. I don't know. And then the person does not turn the radio on in order to hear music or get news. It's not that the person has an inordinate appetite for entertainment. They don't turn them on to do anything. They just have this basic disposition to turn on radio. Okay, that's how the case is described. And then the idea is, well, okay, the idea is this Radio Man character, it doesn't increase his welfare to turn on radio. Why? Well, then one explanation could be, well, when he turned on the radio, he doesn't get any pleasure from that. He's just going around just turning on the radio for pleasure. If there's no pleasure, doesn't genuinely desire it, doesn't contribute to welfare. All right, next example is from Garnet. So imagine that you are about to be injected with a powerful addictive drug. And what will happen after is a like very special drug that's not like regular drug. So after you are injected every morning, you'll wake up with an extremely strong desire to have another injection of the drug. And crucially, having the desire in itself is neither pleasant nor painful. If you don't fulfill the desire after an hour, you have extreme pain. But when you take the thing, you don't get pleasure. And you'll have ample supply of the drug, so you'll never be worried about not getting the drug. And yeah, so that's the situation. And here's the question: if when you switch to the drug regime, does that suddenly improve your welfare? Because now every day you're satisfying an extra desire. And Parker's thinking, no, that doesn't make sense. And then one way to explain that is that when you take this drug, you don't get any pleasure. And so you don't genuinely desire to take the drug. So you're not satisfying a genuine desire, it doesn't help you well. Okay. Next case is, then Heathwood's got two more classes of case because he claims that moral desires and prudential desires do not contribute to welfare. And I just want to apply these two cases. I don't agree with him about the data here. That's going to be relevant. I agree about all the other cases discussed today. We don't agree about these two cases, but we're going to have for now. I do the cases to go back to that later. So the first example is moral desires. The idea is, okay, when you have a moral desire to do something and it kind of overrules your regular desire, and then you do it, that didn't improve your welfare. You're sacrificing your welfare for morality. Is the idea. And then the case is, it's like you and a friend are eating pizza together, and there's one slice left, and you desire it, but then you decide that your friend deserves the slice of pizza that day or something, and so you give them the piece of pizza, even though you would really enjoy it. This is a bummer, but I'm going to do what's right and help make it. And then his thought is, okay, in that case, you didn't get pleasure from giving me the pizza slice, and so it didn't raise your welfare. And then there's prudential. Then there's also, interestingly, there's conflict with prudence as well. So imagine there's a smoker who really wants to quit smoking and spend, well, what does it mean really wants? They are motivated to quit smoking. They spend the month quitting smoking so that their health will improve. And then imagine they succeed, but also at the end of the month, the world ends, there is no future for this person. Yeah. Well, hold on. Did it improve their welfare with smoking? And then the issue is, well, what they were most motivated to do was quit. So it seems like they most wanted to quit smoking. So they got what they wanted. So, actually, it was great for them. But that doesn't seem like the right thing to say. And then again, Heathwood says, well, you don't get pleasure. Well, it doesn't really say, but the pleasure theory says, you don't get pleasure from quitting smoking. And so you didn't genuinely desire to quit smoking. Okay. So that's the pleasure theory. That's the good things about the pleasure theory. That's now we're at the end of Chris Heathwood's 2019 paper. We are celebrating the pleasure theory. Looks like the pleasure theory is good. Pleasure theory is kind of bad for our little buddies, for the AIs, because, you know, I think it's relatively easy to make AIs that have very complex action dispositions, and then where those dispositions are mediated by representations of the world. But it might be harder to make AIs that feel pleasure, and we have to figure out what pleasure and pain are. You know, that seems a challenge. So if, you know, actually welfare, even on desire satisfaction, requires pleasure, that might pose a greater challenge for AIs. But is this a good theory? Is the pleasure theory good? And I claim no, it's bad theory. And so here are a bunch of further problem cases that I think are not well explained by the pleasure theory. And I'm going to claim it's instead better explained by an alternative approach to the problem of genuine desire. Okay, so the first case is a kleptomaniac. So imagine a kleptomaniac who's like a very strong motivation to steal. And whenever they have an opportunity for stealing, they don't like super deliberate about what they're doing. And moreover, if it turns out there's a lot of cost to doing it, they still do it anyways. Very strong urge to steal. Okay. And then here's the thing though, is I think it's very easy to imagine the kleptomaniac when they steal and get the I don't know. You can imagine, I think the most natural way to imagine a kleptomaniac is that they get pleasure when that happens. Maybe not all kleptomaniacs are like that. You can also imagine a sad, jaded kleptomaniac who no longer gets pleasure, but lots of kleptomaniacs I think would get pleasure in such a situation. So then it seems like pleasure theory is going to say that it does raise their welfare to steal. And okay, so that's a prediction pleasure theory makes. Next, other cases of addiction. Yeah, so like here's a case from Harry Frankfurt, a heroin addict who fully hates his addiction and always struggles desperately to no avail against his drug. Tries everything that he thinks might enable him to overcome his desires for the drug, but his desires are too powerful for him to withstand. In the end, they conquer him. He's an unwilling addict, helplessly violated by his own desires. Here's the issue: is look, some addicts don't feel pleasure when they take the drug, but there's at least versions of this addict that do feel pleasure when they take heroin. And so if the difference was just that you're disposed to get pleasure, actually, you know, this addict would count as genuinely desiring to take the drug, and then taking the drug will contribute to their welfare. So one of the motivations for the pleasure theory was supposed to be that it made sense of the Parfit case of this kind of special kind of addiction, but I think it actually doesn't generalize to many common cases of addiction. And then the last case to think about, emotional disturbance from Gary Watson. Watson. It's kind of a disturbing trigger warning. It's kind of I find it disturbing. But so consider the case of a woman who has a sudden urge to drown her fallen child in the bath. Or the case of a squash player who, while suffering an ignominious defeat, desires to smash his opponent in the face with the racket. Okay, so in this case, imagine that the squash player does smash their opponent in the face, or that the mother does drown the baby, and then imagine that the moment after this emotional disturbance occurs, the world ends. Question, did engaging in this behavior contribute to the agent's welfare? And I think it's, again, very natural to imagine that in the instant that the agents do this behavior, they do get pleasure from doing it. Of course, you can imagine that, 30 minutes later or 10 minutes or 5 minutes later, they may feel regret, and they experience psychic pain from having done it, but they are disposed to feel pleasure from doing it. So seems like the pleasure theory predicts these actions do contribute to welfare. I think they do not contribute to welfare actually. And then the last case to get on the table is Dear Stoicus from Fred Feldman. So Mr. Stoicus is he's an ascetic philosopher or a mathematician, let's say, okay, and he has no worldly he does not value worldly things. He doesn't like wine, doesn't like hot dogs, dessert, sensory pleasures and pain. He's not interested in them. He's not motivated to pursue sensory pleasures and pain. He's motivated to do pure math. And that's what he says in his life. So very rarely, he never eats dessert and things like that. So then there's a question if he so there's many questions about Stoicus. One is, suppose Stoicus does do a bunch of pure math and does a really good job. Does that contribute to his wealth? And looks like the pleasure theory may predict that it doesn't contribute to welfare. Of course, it depends what pleasure is. So there's different theories of pleasure. There are attitudinal theories of pleasure, where pleasure basically is what you desire it is. And then, okay, maybe he has pleasure in that sense, but then there's sensory pleasure or phenomenal pleasure. I mean, there's a specific experience associated with pleasure. It doesn't seem like he has that. And then, so I think the more interesting notion of pleasure for this dialectic would be a sensory pleasure thing, because if you have a very expansive notion of attitudinal pleasure, that like Stoics comes having pleasure, it'll be pretty easy for our little AI buddies potentially to have that notion of pleasure. So if you interpret the pleasure theory as a somewhat demanding notion of pleasure that Stoicus doesn't have, then it would predict that Stoicus does not get welfare from satisfying the goals. That's the issue. Okay, so that's the problems with, oh, and I have a chart on page 3 that, okay, so the minus means it predicts no welfare, the plus means it predicts welfare, and then bolded predictions are bad. So that summarizes the pleasure theory. So it made the correct predictions about radio man, addiction, pure cases of addiction, moral and prudential desires, but in my opinion, makes the wrong predictions about mania, addiction with pleasure, and emotional disturbance with pleasure, and I think it also makes the wrong predictions. Okay, so is there another theory that can do better? Well, I think that there is a different theory that potentially is better, and these are called reflective endorsement theories of genuine. Well, okay, there are reflective endorsement theories of various things, but you know, some people are like trying to figure out like when does a desire give you a normative reason. Some people are trying to figure out when desires are relevant to the worthiness. I'm interested in when do desires contribute to welfare, and I'm kind of taking that most of these reflective people are interested in like generating a normative reason. I'm just going to force their theory over to a theory of welfare. You know, I don't care if they agree. I just want to explore the theory. So that's back to page 1. Flipping back to page 1, then we're on the higher order theory. So you genuinely desire the P, if and only if you desire the P and you desire the desire. So what is reflective endorsement? One theory of reflective endorsement. I mean, the more general thing would be, well, your desire has to be reflectively endorsed. One theory of reflective endorsement from Frankfurt and Lewis is, oh, well, you endorse your desire if you desire to have the desire. Okay, so let's think about what predictions this theory makes. All right, and I think it makes lots of good predictions. So with Radio Man, I think it's plausible that Radio Man does not desire to have the desire to turn on radios. He is going around turning on radios, but for example, imagine the Radio Man were suddenly confronted with a button that could extinguish his desire to turn on radios. I think it's very natural to imagine that either he's indifferent about pressing the button or he would like the button. He might like to press the button if he notices the opportunity cost. You know, he can't get a date because he's just turning on these radios all the time. He keeps canceling appointments with friends. He's, you know, really flaky because all these radios. So he sees the button. You might imagine he's quite interested in pressing the button that extinguishes his desire, suggesting the desire not to desire. And in that case, then he wouldn't genuinely desire radios. Similarly, with the Parthenian addiction case, as with all addictions, are actually the most canonical application of higher order theory, I think, is to cases of addiction. The idea is addicts often seem to engage in, it seems like they would really like to not desire to take the drug, and often they take steps to try to extinguish the desire to take the drug. And so, again, it seems like higher order theory can also handle cases of addiction. And then also, if you look at, so we talked about, so there were these cases of kleptomania and addiction with pleasure and emotional disturbance. And in all those cases, even though you get pleasure from engaging in the behavior, in each of those cases, it seems like you don't desire to have the desire. So I think it would be natural also for the kleptomania to, you know, as they, you know, reflect on the fact that whenever they deliberate about what to do, even when they, you know, even when they do go through the process of deciding whether or not to steal and decide to unsteal, they still end up stealing. Obviously, it's very easy to imagine such a kleptomaniac wanting not to have this compulsion. And similarly, with the woman who has an urge to drown her ball of child, I think it's natural to imagine that she desires not to have such an urge, even if she has it. Okay, so those would be, and Stoic and Mr. Stoicus as well wants to do pure math. I think he also wants to do pure math. So those are the good pieces. For higher order theory, makes the wrong prediction about things about moral and prudential desire. So, you know, usually when you have a moral desire to help your friend with the pizza, you'd also desire to have that desire, right? That's the usual. I think it's a much stranger moral psychology to be where your moral desire is overruling your desire to eat the pizza, but also you're alienated from your moral desire, wishing to have the moral desire would be a much more research case. It seems like, at least in the standard case, which is enough for the dialectic, yeah, the agent in fixed lines does reflectively endorse their desire to help their friend, and yet apparently that doesn't appear to be well. And then similarly with prudence, well, the smoker who wants to quit, yeah, they also want to quit. So again, it seems like that would be counterintuitive. So then that brings us to, if you look at the second row of the chart, so now we're in this interesting impasse where we have two theories and they explain different cases. Let's see. Okay. Good. I had on the hand of the bonus material also there's another theory that's sort of the Lord theory of desire. I'm not going to talk about that during the talk, but just know that it is that. Okay. Okay. So those are kind of the case space. Those are some case space issues with the higher order theory, but I think there's also some more foundational issues with the higher order theory that are worth grappling with the neuro two. The first foundational issue that, for example, James says stuff is the babies and dogs. You know, babies and dogs can have love there, but maybe they don't have higher order desires. Okay. And then the second issue is that's very Michael Smith. You know, the more problem. The next issue is, well, why do we care about second order desires? Why not third order? Second order to the third order. So horrible, you know, that's like the more problem like considers that sufficient to dismiss the entire view. Okay. So those are some issues. Okay. So I would like to try to save the higher order theory from those kinds of issues by appealing to kind of a pivot from higher order desires to fragmented desire. So if people familiar with fragmentation, so basically the idea of fragmentation is that sometimes, especially when we look at action disposition, what the agent's disposed to do, actually they're disposed to act very differently in different choice situations. So there's a famous situation David Lewis has where you're like lost in the Princeton and you have some inconsistent beliefs about the arrangement of roads. When you're on one road, you think it's going northeast or north-south. When you're on this other road, you think it goes north-south, but you also have an understanding distinct or perpendicular. And his view is, well, basically, depending on where you are in the environment, you're disposed to act in different ways. And so there is no one set of beliefs and desires that rationalize your behavior. Basically, you have different dispositions to act in different choices. Because dispositions always have this conditional structure. You're disposed to do this if you're in these circumstances. But then you can, once you realize that the condition has this conditional structure, you ask, well, in what range of circumstances are you disposed to? And then, okay, so then I think that kind of naturally suggests a sort of stability condition on genuine desire, where you genuinely desire something when you're stably disposed to take the actions that you believe are means to. Which means across a range of choice situations, you have this stable position. Okay. And then the observation is that when we look at these putative cases of level conflict in the first and second order desire, there's an alternative way to describe what's happening. When we look at the drug addict, okay, here's an interesting issue. Is often, if you were to extinguish your desire to do something, that itself would undermine your disposition to do it. So if the addict could distinguish their desire to take heroin, they can foresee that would cause them to take less heroin. But then that suggests in any situation, so imagine the addict can just, you know, take a pill and that pill extinguishes their desire to take heroin. In the choice situation where they're disposed to take that pill is thereby a choice situation where they are disposed to not take heroin, where they're disposed to promote the goal of not taking heroin. Does that make sense? And so you can redescribe these cases of level conflict. You can often redescribe them as actual cases of fragmentation, where the agent does not have a stable disposition of a goal. And then we can go back and say, well, it's not actually about higher order desires. That's not what matters to genuine desire. What matters is having stable desire. And then when we do that, that avoids these structural problems of simple. So then go back to these simple creatures, the dogs and the babies. Well, dogs and babies, maybe they don't have high order desire. We can still ask the question of whether they stably promote goals or whether they promote very different goals in different choice situations. And so the stable theory, I think,
can capture all of the cases that higher order desires capture without making bad predictions about dogs and babies. And then also there's no issue about second versus third order. Because basically, if there's any order at which you seek to have the opposing desire, that'll probably trickle down into a choice situation that's going to frustrate your first order desire. Something like that. Okay. And then let's see. Okay, there's another case called Cool that I'm gonna skip. The one thing I want to discuss though is this stability theory. While it addresses the kind of exceptional challenge, it does still have these issues of moral desires. I want to contest the data there. I think those are not good examples relevant to our here. Wow. First, prevention desires. The issue, so that was the smoker who successfully quit smoking and then is obliterated before it can improve his health. And here, I think the natural thing to do is distinguish instrumental versus intrinsic desire. He didn't have an intrinsic desire to quit smoking. He had an instrumental desire to quit smoking that was instrumental on the end of becoming healthy. And then he did not become healthy. So yes, his desire to be healthy was stronger than his desire to smoke, but his desire to be healthy was not satisfied. So, okay. So that's what I say about the prudential case. Then the moral desires. Yeah, working through that. But what I would say is that, okay, is the moral desire case supposed to be a weird case or a normal? But there are normal cases where people, do the right thing instead of just helping themselves. And then, okay. For the normal cases, my thing is the normal cases, let's get a little more specific on what's happening. Because I think in a normal case, when an agent does, they're not motivated to de dicto do what they morally ought to do under that description. And normal people are motivated de re, for example, to help their friend. That's what they're motivated to help their friend. And I think if you are just directly motivated to help your friend, and then you do it, I don't see why that wouldn't contribute to it. Seems to be very natural that that would contribute. It's this fetishistic desire to just do what is moral wouldn't contribute to well. But when we look at, regular desire, then I don't. Second of all, normal moral agents, if they don't do what they morally ought to do, they'll feel feelings of guilt and shame. So if we're imagining it like that, then it seems like there is potentially an affective component as well. And so it's just very unclear what's going on with the case. Anyways, we can talk about that more later. I think things get pretty nasty in the dialectic right there. But could be a bloodbath. I don't know. Anyways, okay. Then before I end, I want to defend the stability theory with a deeper argument. But the argument's so good that you won't be able to resist it. So good. Even if you're someone like Adam who's like, well, what's that? You will not be able to handle this argument. It's so good. Okay, so this argument is about the function of the concept of welfare. And my claim is when we think about the function of the concept of welfare, we would really want it to pick out something like stability rather than function. Pleasure, that the pleasure theory notion of genuine desire does not really contribute to the function of the concept. Whereas the stability theory. So what's the function of the concept of welfare? And my proposal is one of the key functions of the concept of welfare is to facilitate interpersonal coordination. For example, in the state of nature, not the state. And what's the basic idea? Is if we are all in the state of nature, we don't have, moral technology. Okay, in that situation, we're in a prisoner's club where, we don't care about. I don't care what happens to me. And I have a choice of whether to defect or cooperate. And defection is better for me no matter what you do. And so we're in this terrible situation. And then where does welfare come? Welfare evolved as a solution to that. And the way that it's a solution, this is explored in great detail in very influential work from Gary Becker. The idea is, well, what happens is I suddenly start my payouts or my utility suddenly is sensitive to your utility. So when I treat you as having welfare, that means that what happens to you when your desires are satisfied, something like there. And once we adjust our payouts that way, we can very quickly leave the state of nature, because basically before the welfare adjusted payoffs, well, if I defect and you cooperate, I do really well, if you do horrible, you're wiped out. But once I care about your welfare, you being wiped out is itself after. So if we all can evolve this capacity for our own utility to be sensitive to our partner's utility, then gosh, you better, if we all evolve that as a group, it would be better for us to have that kind of utility structure. And so I think that's the role that welfare plays. And then here's the observation: if you think that's the key role that welfare plays, then I don't think pleasure theory is the right way to go. You really want it to be essentially connected to actions. That's what it's going to be about, because when we're thinking about game theory and the kinds of, iterated reasoning about other players' behavior, what we care about is how they're disposed to act. And the notion of payoff that will be relevant for doing game theory is not going to involve pleasure. It's going to involve action. The question is what kind of action is involved. And my claim is it involves stable action. The idea being that I can't make peace with you if you are at war with yourself. So if I'm trying to coordinate with you and we're trying to get out of the state of nature, I'm going to take your desire seriously. But what if you're a drug addict? If you're a drug addict and half the time you're taking heroin, the other half of the time you're actually trying not to take heroin and you're doing all these things to not take heroin, what am I supposed to do? If I just put your desire for heroin in my utility function, well, actually, that's not going to assist us in getting out of the state of nature, because then half the time you'll be on my side, the other half of the time you're going to be fighting. So the picture is maybe the concept of welfare gravitates to the desires that are stable. And it's like, we're going to care about what the other person wants, but only when they have stably made up their mind about what they're doing. Otherwise, it's not going to be productive to promote their love. So that's kind of the general picture. And then my challenge to the, I think there are pleasure theorists, and my challenge to them would be to articulate what, for example, evolutionary function the concept of welfare have that would make it gravitate to pleasure rather than these other things. Are we just welfare fetishists who are just living, with the concept we have, or are we thinking about what role does this concept play, in our life, why did we evolve this concept? Okay, well, I wanted to finish early because James graciously volunteered to give a long, longer than regular Q&A comment to me. I thought it'd be nice because, James has worked a lot of this, especially in fact, I started working on this paper because Dan and James were telling him this, and James basically threatened to kill himself if I did not, take seriously this problem of genuine desire. So, James, maybe you can comment now. Got whole audience on the internet.
So I guess we'll go through the cases here. So I guess on your chart, pleasure, the problems for the pleasure. The first kleptomania. I guess flatly, I'll do this in multiple ways. Flatly, I'll just say I don't see the problem here, or really with any of these cases. So it seems to me that the kleptomaniac, as long as they really were attracted to stealing and they really got pleasure from stealing, they were made better off. Their life just ended the second after they stole the thing. He was like, yeah, that's one way in which their life went better than it would. The impure addiction case is a little different, but again, I don't see the issue. It seems like, yes, their life went slightly, they were really attracted to getting the drug. They see their drug dealer, they get the drug, they feel pleasure based on that, then their life ends. Yeah, it seems like their life went better in virtue of that addition to desire satisfaction. Same with emotional disturbance. Killing the baby seems like a bad thing, but again, if the world just ends right after you kill the baby, you really have to imagine they were really attracted to killing this baby, right? They were really attracted to the baby. Then the world ends. It seems like the desire satisfaction is better. I'll give another way of getting those intuitions in a second. Lastly, I just want to address stoics. One way of thinking of pleasure is in terms of enjoyment, enjoying yourself. Well, it says in the literal passage that he enjoys the peace and quiet. So this suggests that, in fact, he is getting, a pleasure-related desire, so it implies that it's like his going better on the pleasure here. That was good. So, just to sort of go through these three cases, kleptomania, addiction, and emotional disturbance again. one way of thinking of this, I don't think it's any accident that these are all naturally conceived of as cases of sort of internal struggle or internal conflict. So here's what I think. We can either imagine that these people have desires that these people desires are in tension with some of their other desires. But then in that case, we should count the other desires too. Right? So for example, the impure addiction is basically stipulated that they have this desire for the drug, but they also have this other desire, maybe a desire to not want to take the drug, or maybe just a desire to not want the drug at all. But that's presumably a pleasure-based desire too, right? When they get the drug, they both get pleasure from the one desire, and they maybe feel shame or unpleasantness from the same thing, getting drug, right? So the pleasure theorists might say, well, there is an increase in the welfare, but there's also a decrease, as evidenced by the two different feelings, the good feeling and the bad. Same with emotional disturbance. Either this desire is in tension with some other desire, like don't kill your baby, in which case we should count both desires, or there's no tension at all, in which case we should really just think they want to kill their baby and it's good for them when they do. So one last way of explaining these, when you look right below on the handout of higher order desires, higher order desire theory, Simon says, has no problem with kleptomania, addiction, emotional disturbance. The pleasure theorists could just say, well, for every higher order desire they posit, we'll posit a higher order desire too. And these higher order desires will make sense of our intuitions about the people not being better off. So we can just say, for instance, in the impure addiction case, yes, they have this pleasure desire for the drug, but they also have a pleasure desire to not desire the drug. So when they get the drug, first order desire is satisfied, but their second order desire is frustrated. That's why they're no better off. So I don't think these objections work. I think we should revert to the idea that pleasure theory, well, not as stated, but something like it is true. And we should also conclude that things are in fact bad for the idea of
So, yeah, so I think I'm happy to say that there is internal conflict in the struggle cases. And so there's a desire that's satisfied and a desire that's frustrated. But what all the theorists need to do in that case is to then give a theory of weight. So if there's a desire that's frustrated and a desire that's satisfied, overall, did it improve welfare or not? And then the issue is that the natural theory of weighing to give, if you start with the motivational theory, would be that the strength of the desire is proportionate to the motivational force of the desire. If you do that in the kleptomania and addiction and emotional disturbance case, the thing that has the most motivational strength is the first one. So then you would predict that overall that increased their wealth. Whereas, in my opinion, overall their welfare was worse for having them. So that would be an issue with the way you. So what you had a few different responses. One response on the pressure is to add extra desires. By contrast, on the stable theory, the higher order theory, the desire to do it doesn't enter the calculus in the first place. So the way you went on the pleasure theory is we had two different desires that both count as genuine, and then they weigh off it. Right? But then the question would be, how do you weigh them? Now, I did assume that their weight is proportional to their motivational strength. That's something that the pleasure theorists could deny. So, for example, Schroeder and Arpalo have a specific theory of addiction that they think that addictive drugs like that use dopamine hijack your reward system so that the strength of the desire no longer is proportionate to motivation. But that only work for very specific cases like the drug addiction. I don't know that much about this too. Yeah, okay, so that's one thing. Yeah, I think that's the main thing I wanted to say. But I was actually deciding to do because you were also saying that you were okay with granting welfare. So maybe you're thinking that they do have both desire. And so maybe you're thinking, yeah, in the, for example, emotional there are both desires there. So there is a positive and negative, but it is on the side of yeah, it does raise it.
So then it comes down to just what you think about it. And for me, when I think very vivid, that the person is not, that, does not reflectively endorse the behavior, I get a strong judgment that they don't have. Another thing I would wonder, these cases are originally from the literature about normative reasons, or then people use this as the object evaluate. And so then I want to know whether you guys think that the agent, what does the agent have normative reason to do? And then if you think that it positively contributes to welfare, but they don't have normative reason to do it, what's going on with the thing? And then the last thing is with Stoicus, I agree that you can get a reading of Stoicus where, oh, the Stoicus enjoyed it. But then again, the question is, well, what notion of enjoyment would that be? Because if it's a purely desire-based notion of enjoyment, then the buddies, the AIs will essentially have that notion. Anyways, those are some responses. Okay.
Q&A, raise your hand if you have questions. We start with Mr. Prayer.
So thanks a lot. Just wondering thing. So if you have these strong intuitions, like being morality, being mind, does not have action. So this I can perhaps you have similar intuitions related to the counting class desires. Why don't you include the theory of objectivist theory count of well-being?
Yeah. Interesting. So the first thing on counting blades of grass, I think there's a version of counting blades of grass where the person has more like a radio like urge. And so that could explain without an objective list why it's bad. Then there's a more complex version of counting blades of grass where there's a very stable higher order disposition to be pursued. And then it starts to get fuzzier for me what my judgments are. But yeah, so I think you could add objective. You could add a further condition on genuine desire, saying also the thing has to be objectively valuable. I think though that condition alone, that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about whether that condition alone would handle the whole range of cases. Because, for example, turning on radios, so, but imagine it was not, imagine it's like something valuable. Then maybe that doesn't change our judgments in the case, and then objective list alone wouldn't help. But I think you could add objective list to the conditions. And James has this paper on well, if you just have near objective lists, it's just having things that are objectively valuable. That doesn't seem like it contributes to welfare because you're alienating. So if you instead put the objective list condition within genuine desire, that avoids alienation because you also have to desire it. So I can see that's a nice way of going for objective listers. And then I think that will allow that when you do the morally right thing, because you reflectively endorse doing it, and that will contribute to welfare. I guess.
Separate those theories with the eye that yes, pleasure and emotion.
Yeah.
Possible problem with objectivist theory that's
Sound very
well, okay.
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask a question, I guess, completely outside of the literature, but my one reference point goes to this comes to more than the LSE, but like John Birch, who are trying to expand the domain of welfare to include more animals that's listed in the welfare policy of the United States. And their arguments coming from welfare from a very different angle, and just like wondering, kind of feed it back into your approach. I couldn't really see how stable desire is kind of established like over the ceiling of like what's included and what's excluded. So like stable desire seems to include like a full range of animals. So I was like wondering, is this like a half an advantage to this? Or is it a problem that you need to establish a one to like
yeah. So there's a researcher I think who has claimed that in the case. So sorry, Jonathan Birch's work is, as you said, focused mainly on where do we draw the line now?
Yeah, and then he used like
yeah, and I think a lot of people who do that work are very pleasure focused. Which animals have sensory pleasure and sensory pain? But there's a different approach to animal welfare that has been defended by this researcher saying no, what we really care about is what animals want. we shouldn't be thinking as much about animal pleasure and animal pain. What matters is what they want, and whether they're living lives where they get what they want. And then the question would be, what does it take for an organism to have desires? And there, yeah, I mean, to me, it's about, obviously there's many ways you can answer this question. I'm going to patient deserve. The way that I myself like to think about it is that we posit beliefs and desires as an interest in the best explanation of behavior. And that I kind of have the best systems here. The thing genuinely has beliefs and desires is that we have the best explanation of its behavior, or if those beliefs and desires, and there would be really good before is does it engage in very complex behavior? And is it impossible to explain that complex behavior through kind of a finite list of heuristics or rules, which is by themselves? So there's like I've read papers where people try to explain snake behavior through these like specific rules. I don't remember what it is, but it's so there's a certain way of this. It would be like that. So that would be kind of the way to pursue the question. I'm probably the intentional standpoint. Well, and it's got a lot of baggage, you know. You start saying like the word realism. So I don't know. And I think the theory that I understand is perfectly continuous, for example, with David Lewis's general best systems approach to scientific laws. And it's not an anti-realist.
Yeah, thanks. So I wanted to ask your intuition about a kind of case like that's a case. So talking about somebody who is motivated by duty. They believe that they got to like press this button all the day, all the time, and that it's really important for them to do so. I don't know, and maybe do a combination objective list kind of thing. The button is important, like release and bail people somewhere, but they dedicate themselves to this task, and they have very stable action disposition to get the button press the station on time. You ask them about it, they would say, oh, yeah, pressing the button, thumbs up, but they never get like these excitement. They're stone faced all the day, doing this all the time, every second they're awake. To me, it seems like at the very least, it's far from the best sort of life. But on this kind of view, it seems like they're satisfying a desire all day, every day. It's super shitty desire. But if they're not excited, they're not even proud. They even look at themselves in the mirror in the morning. It's just like, gotta press the button. That's what I'm doing. It just doesn't seem so great.
Yeah. So one thing to note about that is when I imagine a variance case where every time they press the button, they just have like the sensory pleasure experience as it being their time. That also doesn't make it seem like a very good life. And so there's a different dimension that we might add to our theory that we need so maybe, the right theory of welfare is going to be, okay, the overall value of your life is not just a matter of the number of desires satisfaction here, but also the complexity of the desires, and then we make so you can have that kind of stuff in too. And when I start to imagine he's doing all sorts of different things, but not having sensory pleasure each time, then I feel we're more so with this whole time, or any pleasure at all. Well, what does any guy? I don't know about this.
I mean, it's sensory pleasure. Sure, the sensory pleasure is something, or you could just mean pleasure.
Yeah. So if there's no sensory pleasure, I can still get on board. There's lots of welfare. It's very rich, complex life that get lots of I think there will be notions of pleasure that they enjoy. Maybe they enjoy it, but then our AI brethren.
Yeah. So one thing that I agree that if they just like pressing the button, some version. It does seem quite a lot better. Like I would press a button like that. But yeah, I agree it's not great. But then I wonder if maybe this coaching is like a weakness in the way that the pleasure is. Because Declan Smith had this recent paper where he argues with this view of desire, I think, as previously. And what he said is that it's not just that you get pleasure when it seems to you that the desire is filled, but that you take pleasure in imagining. When I think of the guy, so there's a button version, and then there's another version where he's like every morning he's like, I press that button, okay, press the button. It's like enthused about pressing the button. It's not just have to press and one have to get back. Then it seems.
Yeah, of course. course, the pleasureless person will be thinking they got the best out of them.
Yes, with a smile.
Okay. Yeah, so smiling, now we're getting into this hip marriage, oh, when the rats are smiling, that's so good when they smile. Yeah, I guess, so first of all, I'm perfectly happy to add to the pleasure theory that also imagining the thing causes pleasure, as well as the sensory pleasure as well. I don't think that's a difference for the specific discuss. But yeah, in my opinion, yeah, it's not a game changer, but from knowledge, we'll bear.
So regarding AI welfare, the most important now in this case seems to be the Stoicus case.
Yeah.
But I found the case rather unclear. I guess I'm pretty sympathetic to with James or Enos would say. Seems to me that Stoicus really isn't capable of feeling any pleasure or pain. It doesn't seem to have welfare, so I don't think AI is correcting up with it. Tell me more about why I should change my intuitions about that and what you might mean by like enjoyment, maybe.
Yeah, well, so it's very tricky. Does Stoicus have any pleasure in pain? I think Stoicus is doing things he wants to do. Stoicus may also be in mental states that he wants to be. The key, though, is Stoicus is not having any of the canonical sensory experiences that we associate with pleasure. Like, it's fine. When Stoicus does the mathematical proof, for example, it doesn't have, the phenomenology of Eureka. It might, doesn't have tingles on his spine.
But he does have phenomenal.
He has he gets phenomenal color. Yeah, he has phenomenal sounds, all sorts of things like that. Yes, so he's not a zombie. But he doesn't have the particular sensations. So especially, one simple way to do it, but maybe James and Dan don't know that. But imagine that it has no touch phenomenon. A lot of sensory pleasure stuff can do that. And then, but then there's also, I think, gustatory. It's very sensory pleasure very quickly. So the takeaway is station. No taste phenomenology. Things like that. You can take away music too. Do that because I think it's well, I don't want him to go full sound too. I mean, nice thing about just the visual modality, less associated with sensory pleasure. So, anyways, since I take away all those sensory pleasures, I definitely still, first of all, I intuit that the person has welfare. Second of all, I think certainly from game, state of nature sort of basis, it's very important that our social levels take into account Stoicus' preferences, or else it's going to be better. Then does Stoicus enjoy? Well, he's doing what he wants to do, and he's going to start to get a bit verbal there. But the key thing that we want to say is that Stoicus is in the kinds of mental states that AIs can have. So, however you want to use the terms pleasure and enjoyment in that case, we think Stoicus, the AIs can have that. Well, okay, maybe AIs don't have phenomenal visual experience, but the key is that doesn't make a difference to whether Stoicus does not know it's Stoicus.
I just wonder when you talk about design with a natural design, thinking back on design, and maybe what about design for the very young. Design and design. Seems that they develop that what going on in what design. They open that for different free from my people. That come to that or to get back to the discussion. It can decide just a general name that maybe one to do rigorous conceptual analysis and maybe underlying form here concept to get to the AI form. What can you talk about this guy has decided? It seems that we can attribute put this kind of attribute in the same even if this rate from here is enough for us rather than what's going on here.
It seems that the AI is not the influence. I think it's important to it defines the general name. And I think it's like high. You don't even understand what high is. It's like AI is high. I know to make judgment based on that.
Yeah, lots of great questions. I'm very sympathetic to what you said. So first of all, is desire a natural kind? Well, I think there's several interesting questions. First of all, so we're just doing conceptual analysis of the word desire. Is there a natural kind there? Yeah, I'm somewhat skeptical of that. I actually think our desire reports are, even if it's a natural kind, pick out something kind of dumb. Ethan Jurzak responsible for all the great work on how we use the term desire in natural language. I think like he may be correct, but the resulting thing is not like super important as a feedback. Then there's the notion of desire in cognitive science. I think like one somewhat natural distinction is between conscious system 2 deliberative reasoning that seems to often follow the structure of like Aristotelian syllogism, where you have an end and then do a cost benefit analysis of each goal, and then you form an intention on the basis of that. You know, so that would be one thing versus, as you said, unconscious, more associational reinforcement learning is behavior. You know, so I think there's lots of tools there. And those are different things. And then I think there's a question. So I've been zooming in on this notion of desire that is kind of belief mediated. But that notion might be slightly different than the distinction in cognitive science between system 2 and system 1 processing. If you can have unconscious belief. So that gets into these questions about the nature of unconscious belief, unconscious desire. So it could be that even if we go away from conscious deliberate reasoning, there could still be a distinction between bare habits and things that are more kind of belief mediated and more coherent. You know. Then another question for the welfare is, I don't think welfare is a natural kind. I think there's a process of welfare, but I would say with that. It's the pleasure theorists, they do their own work on the evolution of our religions as well. I think there's three, and one of them is aiding in solving prisoners on the interpersonal coordination. And that notion, as I said, so then the question would be there, is the relevance kind of reasoning that agents engage in this thing, major conscious deliberate system, or does it also include more general ideas? And I think it could include the more general things as long as it's kind of belief mediated, you know. But I think to me, that's why I want to end the verbal disputes. It's ultimately going down to what's kind of the evolution function of welfare, and then do AIs fall into the type that was kind of why we selected for it.
And I think the key question, one of the key questions here will be applied to the side is whether the side is there. And it is a different structure and it would do any assumptions of their base in the side of that. Maybe we can put on two materials. We can we can understand what they need. Concept of design.
Yeah, I was responsible to that, but because it's like I'm saying, well, there's this distinctive role the welfare plays. And then when you see that role, you'll see that the stability theory, desire construed as stable action conditions are exactly what fills the role. And desire, even if the term desire is not an adequate, the notion of a stable action isn't it. And then that plays the key role in the theory of welfare. But then that could maybe divide. I'm already trying to divide through the question of whether it's really desire by introducing specific desire. Faye.
So they has some second order desire. But they gradually develop some second order desire to have a open that, but not as stable concept as the parent that has a strong second order. So this is very interesting. Sometimes
Yeah.
That is design you know, it's a well-being and high work.
Yeah.
And I don't like how they would really
Yeah, so that's very helpful. So it drills down to what's the relevant notion of this. So here you're talking about instability about whether or not the system has a second design. But yeah, I guess for me, what really matters is whether agent is behaving in one action context in a way that totally undercuts how it behaves in the other action. I don't think that the, 5-year-olds, I don't know, the intermediately developed humans that you're talking about have that kind of instability. And the reason, again, that I care about that kind of instability is in thinking through how to facilitate interpersonal cooperation. The key idea was supposed to be, if you have an agent who is promoting a goal in this context and then promoting the exact opposite in another, you just naively incorporate one of those, that goal into, you're just like, all right, I'm going to help them promote that goal. That's not really responsive to facilitating interpersonal coordination, because then they're going to be undercutting together. So I think that kind of helps sharpen the relevant kind of instability. Now,
they are time frame with the design, and then you get to choose the design. Then the say, if you can't change why it is AI, then but then you get so much AI doing their design change. So do we have more? I mean, you have other ideas about what concept relevant aspects of that we have all things being considered design.
yeah. So I think I again want to appeal to the nature of interpersonal coordination to think about this. So when we are in the state of nature trying to coordinate, like, am I trying to coordinate with the time slice that I'm talking to, or with the whole agent? And what I'm thinking about is, well, yeah, I'm basically in the first instance just doing coordination with the time slice. And then the relevant question will be, is the time slice only disposed, like the thing right here now? Is that thing only disposed to promote its desires now? Or is it disposed to promote the expected satisfaction of all the desires it will ever have? Those are different architectures. Richard Paddock has this book, Choosing for Change Itself, where he kind of talks about you can design different decision theories. One decision theory just maximizes your current desires. A different decision theory, like literally the thing that you will be disposed to do right now if you satisfy that decision theory will be not just taking into account your current desires, but also your expectation about future desires. So if it's an agent like that, then if I need, in order to effectively coordinate with it, I'll need to take into account its expectations about its future desires. But if it's a more naive agent that's just maximizing its current utilities, then no, I only care about its current utilities. So that's kind of how the question would be resolved.
Adam Gibbons?
Yeah, I just have a question.
Yeah.
Line. So the very technical review. What sort of things if you just weekly define it? If instead of what it says on page 1, you notify if I were to say the following, ask anyone who has a people to pass the card. Ask how the fire will provide. That simple picture to fill.
Okay, what do you think about it?
Yeah. Yeah, so the one issue with that, there's a subtlety. So if we think beyond desire, also more like preference like notions like difference versus prefers, there's two versions of the condition you said. So the question is, what if the agent's indifferent about whether desire is being desired or not? The wording that you had would be that even when they're indifferent, they would still count as their desire would count. But then you can imagine maybe there are simple features that don't even count as being indifferent. They just have no preference whatsoever, but they don't have no preference in the sense that they're indifferent. They just like the question doesn't apply, you know? So that's one thing I wanted to clarify, that I think in order to get reflected endorsement, if the agent was indifferent, I think that would probably be bad. And I think you can imagine a version of the radio man case where in fact turning on radio isn't destructive enough. It kind of has no effect on the satisfaction of his other desires, and so he's just indifferent. And so I want that to be ruled out. But then I think the question will come down to why is that theory right? And my thought is that the stability theory makes sense of when the theory is right. There's another thing. I got another case that I didn't discuss called cool. So, the issue that I have encountered in life is that sometimes if you want to be cool, that's not a good way to be cool. I mean, people also talk about the paradox of hedonism, I think, that wanting pleasure is a good way to get pleasure. So then one interesting issue in reflective endorsement theories is when you're in a case where having a desire is a bad way to get the desire. It's quite rational in such a case to want to not want it. But in my opinion, that's not the kind of failure of reflective endorsement that's relevant to undermining your welfare. I think this has not been noted by existing reflective endorsement theories. And so, and so agents like that, I think we want an explanation of what's going on with them and the stability theory, or what's not going on. And the stability theory explains it. Well, even though they have a level conflict, they're not at war with themselves, I think, in a way that undermines the goal of being cool. And then I was thinking maybe, I'm sorry, maybe that was a red herring. Maybe the getting whether the revised higher, what prediction the revised higher. Oh, because sorry, the cool person does desire not to desire, but I was thinking their desire does contribute to their love. And so I think cool would be a counterexample to the revised higher order theory, but maybe not to the stability theory. Is that one? Yeah.
I guess the question is,
Yeah.
what's the problem?
Well, it's just the higher order theory as stated doesn't it doesn't make third order desires relevant. You can imagine a variant of the theory where you have to omega desire, which means you desire and desire to desire and desire to desire to desire, and so on and so forth. And that's the way I would go if I were a higher order theorist. It's just weirdly Lewis to go that way. Then Michael Smith like has a complete mental breakdown about it. Yeah. Next up is rap.
Question about whether it's in the formulation, this is the field, which we have maybe it's already explained that why in the formulation is we write explain what is the state in this the case only if there are no relevant actions. We should think deeply about not being not interesting.
Yeah. I think though, if you think again about the state of nature, it's a difference. Because it's no, but sorry, it's relevant to interpersonal coordination. Because if there's context where they're actively trying to get not pee, then if I start helping them with pee, in any of the contexts where they're trying to get not pee, I'm a war with them. Whereas if they merely have contexts where they're not promoting pee, if I'm helping them with pee, that means in some of the contexts they don't care what I do. So I think that the formulation I have fits better with solving interpersonal coordination.
Under the current formulation, it's satisfied.
But also the formulation is just an only. So in addition to be stably exposed, I think that there needs to be a sufficient number of action contexts where you are, so that gets into like, the way I think about that is examining Wasserman atmospheric dispositions where you're disposed to manifest in a circumstance, basically if not with the conditional chance of manifesting conditional circumstances higher. So I want that to be in there. So you have a high chance of pursuing the action when you believe it's in. And then in addition, there's this extra.
So you would, well, this is in a lot of, let's say a lot of. That's a study. Even if you have believe it.
But I think that it's okay for the agent to have some action contexts where they are not disposed, where they're not promoted. I think that's okay. Maybe not, I guess back to this indifference question. I didn't find a way, I'm not sure, just because I'm feeling the state of nature stuff kind of really says that's not a big issue, but then maybe in like radio man cases, maybe it's like, and maybe there could be some context where they're not disposed to turn on radios. So there's the radio man indifference case. There was the radio man indifference case where intuitively doesn't have welfare, but if he's never like really trying to extinguish the desire, but maybe sometimes he doesn't care about it. But if sometimes he doesn't care about it, I don't know.
Other team theory over the time of the theory, because this theory can avoid invading federal. But I don't think I can't really see that why the stability theory can avoid the invading problem. Like at least for my personal experience, we always stably supposed to take different action, different typical action. So when you want to spell out the stability theory detail, you have to like make the list without the stability. That I think it faces a similar problem like the higher order theory, that it doesn't have doesn't have a great advantage over traditional theory. So why not take over the whole theory?
Yeah, so, okay, yeah, so I think one thing in your question is like, isn't it ubiquitous? Isn't it like so common to have all these contexts with their disposing? Yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question in general about like fragmentation of how common this is. And so, yeah, there's like revised versions of the theory where like I'm saying there can't be any, maybe a different version would be like, there are too many or something like that. And then, yeah, I agree with you, you might need some kind of role.
That's why you see brings walking the flag, but even the core the slider five here. I don't mean that it's like interior than the higher order, but I think superior.
So I just wanted to find, I think for me, the main problems with the higher order theory are that it doesn't generalize to Vegas. And then that it's arbitrary and focusing on the second order, and third, that it's not derivable from the function. But then, yeah, I think the ways that was coming up in this dialectic with James about other truth and pleasure cases. But regardless of the dialectic, I agree with you that there's like a very interesting question of how to do weighing on the stability theory when, if you think that there are lots of action contexts, if it's true that there are lots of action contexts where people behave differently, and then it's, and you don't want to just rule out anytime that's the case the welfare comes for nothing, then there are very different questions about weight. Yeah, that's very interesting. But I wouldn't take that point to be therefore go back to the higher order theory. I think it's just a hard question.
I have a somewhat related question. So, I often desire to play chess on the online platform League Chess. But sometimes I get really frustrated and I spend a lot of time on it. So like also in other relevant contexts, I take actions like prevent myself from playing when league chess. I like putting the app on my phone, or like I log out the website sometimes. So it seems like, yeah, my desire isn't totally to play chess when league chess isn't totally stable. But it also seems to conduce to my well-being.
Yeah, that's not how I want to describe the case you're talking about. There's a general question for fragmentation people about, is that even if you don't apply this kind of fragmentation, so when does fragmentation happen? What I want to say in that example is, no, you have a stable set of desires. What's happening is you have a desire not to be frustrated, and in some contexts that's outweighed. But you will always have those desires, but frustration will only happen in some of the contexts, and when it does, then that outweighs. But there's difficult questions about how to do. I mean, in general, when you have fragmentation, you have this extra dimension of freedom, and then how often do you apply that to the
I thought you'd say something like that. But yeah, I don't know. But it does seem like even when I'm deleting the app, there's a sense in which I still, desire to play. And in fact, there's a way in which I only delete the app because I have a desire to play on league chess. So it does seem like I desire to play on league
I mean, it's
chess.
funny, the case of frustration you said is on the continuum with the squash rackets. But if it feels too much like a whimsical sudden frustration and peak of rage, then I start to think, if you were fragmented and so much the worse for you. Well,
But it just seems like a totally ordinary case. And I agree.
there's a spectrum of like how, when you have these frustrations, to what extent is it just an underlying desire you always have that's activated versus is it kind of overpowering you? And the thought is what's maybe to do action.
Maybe frustration was somewhat of a red herring. Like, say I don't delete the app when I'm feeling particularly frustrated. I just reflect on the fact that like there's some thoughts playing on this website. So then in those contexts, I'm disposed to delete it from my phone. So then you ask, is Adams there are some action contexts where I take actions to frustrate my own playing of league chess. There's some relevant context where I just play on league chess.
Yeah.
It seems like you want to say, kind of generally speaking, Adam desires to play chess on league chess. If he just really didn't desire it,
Actually, I say, the pleasure freaks will say that, oh, just look at how much pleasure you had in time you played chess, and that's good enough. But what I will say is, it's really hard. It's like, if you really are in this, I don't know what the right word for it, you keep going back and forth about whether it's worth doing it, and you're in this wavering reflective endorsement. Yeah, I think it might be indeterminate whether it contributes to welfare. That's one option.
I thought you were gonna say it's indeterminate whether I really desire it, not indeterminate whether but like the weird thing about the stability theory, or some weird thing about it is it's like it's very hard to disentangle from the question of just do you have a stable desire versus do you desire. Part of what it is to desire is to have the disposition, and you might think part of what it is to have a disposition has to be somewhat stable.
Yeah.
So
Well, one way the stability theory goes is it's just an analysis of desire. Sure. It's one way to play it. But I think you can go either that way too. Right. Okay.
I just had a question about your monster like period and like the rule of being through it. I didn't feel like you understood it constructive. So I think I see that welfare is going to aid in coordination, getting that with each other. And you want to say something there like what matters caring about not error, that's what gets you out of prison. But where is stability coming from? Because suppose you're playing in the same age of context, get into a prison setting, but this is really unstable agent. Their desire is very different context, but you're always sensitive to desire. So you get out of prison setting each time systematically.
Yeah, so you can kind of fine-grain how you care about things. Whichever, sometimes you're talking to Jekyll, and sometimes you're talking to Hyde.
Yeah.
From whoever you're talking.
Yeah, they kind of like different agents.
So one picture though, so then I think in this kind of framework, it'll depend on how we specify this development structure. You can imagine the game structure where when you perform your action, you don't know what you're Jekyll and Hyde. You're basing. Would do it like that.
Yeah.
For example. But I agree with you, that's quite, that's quite impressive. Another thing you can imagine is that even though you'll know, that basically that's the best.
I'm sure. I mean, that's not quite a classic prison, but
The other issue with the methodology, it's like one thing to do is just do a specific thing, and then find out, well, but then you can also try to triangulate with our judgments about that. You know, but the way you went, if you just go that way, you're gonna come apart from our ordinary judgments. About it. In my opinion, is then slow clash basis. You know, you'll just say, well, just help. You know, however the person's lives are going, help them that way. But that'll suggest when the addict is like jonesing for heroin, give them the heroin, but then later when they're like, help me, you're like, I'll help you. You know, maybe one issue is memory, so iterating games. Okay, here's a difference. Yeah. Is if the heroin addict remembers that you gave them heroin before, they're gonna resent you for it and punish you.
Yeah.
So you're playing an iterating game. So once you realize it's like that, but then it's really tricky because also if you don't help them have it, then when they're back to jonesing, they'll punish you for having it. And I think this is a real thing, family members of addicts. You know?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's relevant.
So it's kind of the idea that it matters, not that wired for some kind of proven evidence. It's just that in life, we're going to encounter some structures, some games, and so on. There's stability. It's going to be really useful.
That's the picture, and then the question is, which class of games did our concept of welfare evolve to?
Right.
Yeah. And then I tried to suggest two classes of games that are covered. One is where you don't know which object one had, which I do, and the other is playing iterative.
Nice. But it's not just the German bank you need to get out of it.
Well, as you said, it's gonna need to be a bit better.
All right, good.
But never gonna be pleasure. There's no games with that. Right, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it's complicated. What happens with stack hunts is, yeah, so. It's like this. And there's two guys you can go around. And then if you factor in other people's utility, you'll shift to this game. Shift like that. But this is also a stack. But there's this method of resolving stack hunts from Masaki that predicts that when one of them has higher payoffs, it'll kind of tend to go towards that one, and the strength of the tendency is proportionate to the distance. And so if you use the Harsani method, it will help somewhat because you increase the distance between the but it's not helping. It's not like this. This here, it's like amazing. Here, it's just like this little.
Last question, man. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, we talked about, but I just wondered how you're thinking about cases where desire isn't actionable. You'd have to be pretty confused by desire. What's up could be true, or a lot of people throughout history have cared about their heritage. Nothing you can do to get that person ready.
And then the thought is, if you find out, you answer, if there's a.
Well, if you're not to find out,
Whichever it is. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, it's unclear to me what, are these counterexamples?
well, not that, I mean, not as a, you could say, anyone could believe that Russell Butler would make money.
Yeah.
That's that.
Yeah, but that's one way, and I think that's like what Schroeder says, in your basis of desire. In fact, I think he thinks of such cases as motivating, as shifting from simple to positionalist. There are more complex, there are unbelievable propositions. So you could imagine desire. Case. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's really hard, and I think those interpersonal coordination considerations don't really tell us how to settle such things. I don't know, those are like, this. We get stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, so that makes me think, given the focus on like being curative consideration and coordination, how friendly would you be to them of saying, maybe it's not welfare, maybe what we do with main interest is in whether AIs have some feature such that it's not working with that in certain ways. And we no longer need all that welfare, maybe welfare.
Well, but I wanna know, yeah, I mean, to me, the concept of welfare is one of the core moral concepts. I think our moral concepts did evolve to solve very important problems in our evolutionary environment. So, you know, Felix, I mean, what I really care about is the coordination thing, so I'm happy with it in that sense, but I don't think that's, you know, disrespectful to our core moral concepts and divorced out from the evolutionary function. I would rather try to find other evolutionary functions besides coordination. But, you know, I do have another paper, AI Rights for Human Safety, where we abstract from moral questions about the nature of welfare, or just argue that interpersonal coordination and integration suggests that we should grant the rights that as separate, but granting legal rights separate of whether they have moral rights or not. So I can get it.
On that bombshell, let's end